Part 2 of MBA Health Group's webinar mini-series on the Meaningful Use Core Measure requirements. My name is Cody Simpson, and I'm an implementation consultant here at MBA. I know your time is limited, so I want to go ahead and get started. Today's webinar will focus on measures 3 and 4, maintaining the problem list, and e-prescribing. There will be time for questions and answers at the end, but feel free to type your question at any time in the question panel, or wait until the end and we will unmute everyone's lines to answer questions. Meaningful Use Core Measure number 3 is Maintain Problem List. The objective of this measure is for providers to maintain an up-to-date problem list of current and active diagnoses. To meet this measure, more than 80% of all unique patients seen by the provider have at least one entry or an indication that no problems are known for the patient recorded as structured data. There are 3 terms to define for this measure: problem list, unique patient, and up-to-date. A problem list is defined as a list of current and active diagnoses as well as past diagnoses relevant to the current care of the patient. The concept of unique patient means that if a patient is seen by a provider more than once during the reporting period, then the patient is only counted once in the denominator. And finally, up-to-date refers to the status of the problem list, which is populated with the most recent diagnoses known by the provider. The attestation requirements for this measure include a numerator and a denominator. The numerator for this measure is the number of patients who have at least one entry or indication that no problems are known recorded as structured data. The denominator is the number of unique patients seen by the provider during the reporting period. The resulting percentage must be greater than 80%, and there are no exclusions for this measure. So now we'll demonstrate how you could achieve this measure in Enterprise EHR. So let me switch over to our test system here. All right, here we go. So from the clinical desktop, you can select New in the problem area, and that will bring up your Add Clinical Item screen. So you can select the appropriate diagnoses from this screen, or you can select No Active Problems. Now, if No Active Problems does not appear in your favorites list, you can change your active filters, as shown here, to remove this filter because No Active Problems does not contain an ICD-9 code. So what you can do is once you find it, you can just right-click on it and favorite it. But if you use it one time, it'll automatically be entered into your favorites. So I also want to point out that if the patient's active problems are not documented during the visit, an alert will appear in the encounter summary. If you want to access these alerts from the clinical desktop, the user could select the red alert icon up here next to the patient profile. And so this will make the encounter summary appear, showing the meaningful use alerts at the top of the window. The user could then right-click on any of the alerts and resolve some of them from here, some of them you cannot. But it's just good to know that this is where you can find them. All right, so we'll go back to the presentation now. Okay, so there are a few key workflow considerations to discuss within your practice with respect to this measure. First, all active problems must be linked to the appropriate ICD-9 codes, and no active problems must be selected from the Add Clinical Item screen to indicate that a patient has no current or known diagnoses. And finally, like I just showed you, meaningful use alerts will appear in the encounter summary. So before we move on to the next measure, I want to highlight what your meaningful use status report will look like if you haven't seen one already. The report contains a list of all meaningful use measures, including the goal for that particular measure and your score. It is important to note that the numbering convention on the stimulus report does not match CMS-defined measure numbers. So keep that in mind when you're testing. Some of these numbers are not correct. And the report is generated by the stimulus reporting portal, which is updated every night based on the changes you make in the EHR. And this stimulus reporting portal is only accessible once you implement the stimulus set. So if you want more information about that, we would be happy to talk to you about it. Just give us a call. So moving on, meaningful use core measure number 4 is e-prescribing. The objective of this measure is to generate and transmit permissible prescriptions electronically. To meet the requirements of this measure, more than 40% of all permissible prescriptions written must be transmitted electronically using certified EHR technology. So there are two terms we need to define here before moving on, prescription and permissible prescription. So a prescription is defined as the authorization by a provider to a pharmacist to dispense a drug that requires authorization prior to being dispensed. And a permissible prescription is defined as any prescription that is not written for controlled substances found in Schedules 2 through 5. The attestation requirements for this measure include a numerator and a denominator. The numerator of this measure is the number of prescriptions generated and transmitted electronically during the reporting period. The denominator is the total number of permissible prescriptions written during the reporting period. So the resulting percentage must be greater than 40% to meet this measure, and a provider may be excluded from this measure if they write fewer than 100 prescriptions during the reporting period. So there are two additional requirements for this measure. First, prescriptions for pharmacy items such as durable medical equipment and over-the-counter medications are not included in either the numerator or the denominator of this measure. And finally, all instances where a patient specifically requests a paper prescription must be included in the denominator. So instead of doing a full demonstration in the EHR for this measure, since I'm sure all of you know how to prescribe a medication in the system, I want to point out the subtle differences that occur when ordering a medication and how those are either included in the numerator or the denominator. So as you see on this slide, the prescription on the left would not be included in the denominator of this measure because it falls within the exclusion of a controlled substance and is not considered a permissible prescription. You will notice that send to retail and send to mail order do not appear as appropriate ways to communicate this prescription. The prescription on the right, however, is not a controlled substance, and the options of send to mail order and send to retail appear in the drop-down. When you have a permissible prescription, as we just saw, the only two selections that will ensure the prescription is included in the numerator are send to mail order and send to retail. The other four options listed here, call, print, sample, and record, will not count toward the numerator of this measure. There is one workflow consideration to discuss within your practice, and the communications of send to retail or send to mail order must be used when possible in order for a prescription to be counted toward this measure. So that's important to reiterate within your practice. So I want to thank you so much for your attendance and participation on today's webinar. Our next webinar will be held on Thursday, February 9th, from 12:10 to 12:20, or you can join us for the same session in the afternoon from 3:10 to 3:20. We will be covering core measures 5, 6, and 7, active medication list, medication allergy list, and demographics. So you will be receiving an evaluation of this webinar over email. Please take the time to provide feedback as we will use it to develop future content. A recording of today's presentation will be posted on our website. You can see the address on your screen. And please do not hesitate to contact us with any questions you may have. So since we're just at about 10 minutes, I'd be happy to stay on and answer questions from the audience for the next 5 minutes or so. So please stay on the line if you have questions. We'll be unmuting the lines. And if you need to go, thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next week.
Hi, Cody. Jamie here. We have a question. The question is a fax prescription generated via EHR considered electronically submitted?
It is not. So the e-faxing is not considered e-prescribing, and you'll want to make sure that your providers are enrolled in Allscripts. We had this problem the other day. We had a provider that their e-prescribing numbers weren't showing up correctly on their stimulus report, and so we went back and looked, and they hadn't actually been registered through Allscripts. So when they were selecting send to retail, it was actually just e-faxing and not counting towards their e-prescribing numbers. So it's important to make sure all of your providers are enrolled in Allscripts.
Thank you.